play a Pee-wee football game, right? Like we're trying to make sure our topic matches what we do, actually. I think that is kind of obvious. Ask you to pick this up?
Sure. Be flexible. Unexpected things will happen. Things will go wrong. How you deal with it said a lot about us in the program. Work problem solve.
Hopefully this is pretty self-explanatory, but you would be amazed at the stories we have from people who have failed to problem solve on the road. You know, there's nothing what you learned here, which you already knew about styles that you work well with. Go ahead, Penny.
John, before I got there, I worked with him over at Andrew once I had worked here. It's always awesome to, get back off each other and just a really good feel for how to read someone and then just so definitely almost creative.
So certainly working with creative people works for you?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Amen.
So any style works for you. So do you want me to, how long I've known you?
Stepping outside of structure and format, I think I have problems with. But I mean, I can respect if when hopefully there can be some play, and I can fit in that structure a little bit. If someone can step out a little bit, so we can kind of meet halfway.
That's pretty realistic. Thank you. Jerome, I know you and then.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the flexibility, committed to what we're doing, but having flexibility to understand situations change and just that easy.
If you hadn't done it personally, what your assessment of people are that you're working with. But the thing we want to make sure we caution against is that using that as kind of a stereotyping mechanism, like, oh, so-and-so is a D, oh God, here we go, this is going to be like that type of thing. Because that's not easy, right? We talk about being counter to everything else we're talking about here. It's really, how can we use that as an instructive tool to help us prepare to work together? Like, so if I know that, hey, there are certain styles that, can, rub me the wrong way, or there's, certain types of work style in particular, what are the things that you do to prepare yourself to work with a style that you're not as comfortable with? So how can you, as you're preparing to go on a training, mentally prepare yourself to not get frustrated, to not be, right, if there's things you should expect? So what are some of the things you could do?
You learn their style and know what they need to do to succeed. Know their needs.
Yeah.
I mean, you know your own, so you look into that style and know what it is they need to be comfortable and to be able to process.
Yeah, and how do you do that? So you go and say you're going to work with somebody for the first time, you just kind of have that general idea because you met them here or that. What do you do? It doesn't have to be you, Christy. What do you do?
I think you communicate with them. You can communicate with them about kind of your style of doing things, and your wants and needs, and ask them kind of the same thing. And that's how you get feedback. It is hard when it's brand new, but I know that's helped me in the past.
Yeah.
Usually when you're starting to, or I feel like when you're communicating about the agenda and going through it, you can start to pick up on people's styles just by the way people talk through the agenda and talk through, I'll do this part, you do this part. You can tell, someone who's really flexible with it versus someone who's really concerned about knowing this area versus not being, does that make sense? I think you can pick up on those things.
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
Also, communicating, just talking about expectations and what each person wants to get out of the experience ahead of time.
Yeah.
That would be good. So going into it, you already know what my expectations are and what your expectations are. We kind of merge those together and make sure we both on the same page.
Good.
It kind of to reiterate what Jackie was saying, I think that those pre-training meetings are so essential because normally I've found that the other facilitator will tell each other, like, okay, yeah, this is the way I am. Even though you haven't done it together, I like to do this, or this is kind of my style, and you can kind of feed off of that, and you can kind of tell by the way you break it down if someone's really assertive, yeah, I want to do this, or whatever you want me to do, I'll do it, or that kind of thing. And if you yourself tell them, then they'll feel comfortable telling you, like, okay, well, this is where I really am. That's where I would do, like, hey, I'm cool, I'm like that, whatever, we can do this, or we can do that, and then they'll let you know how they are as well. I think that pre-training meeting is the most essential, especially if you have more people.
think about a lot of what people are saying, and I think this comes to the obvious point of communicating with each other before you go into work. There's a structure that we have in place through the pre-meetings, but there's also opportunities for you as individuals too. If it's, taking a little initiative and think about, okay, I'm working with somebody I've never worked with before. Let me reach out and just, have a quick 10-minute conversation to get a sense of one another. The difficulty is we're all running in a million different directions and really busy. And just understanding the last thing you want to do is get caught in the middle of a training and realize that, holy smokes, I needed to communicate a little bit more with this person before I got here. Now it's going to be a long 2 days. Right? So we think about what are the things that I can do to best prepare is kind of what we're doing at. Go ahead, Shirley.
I think we go along with that, to be honest about what you're comfortable doing and what your expectations are when you're in that call, because I know, even I've done this, like, it's whatever, however you want to break it up, but really, maybe it's from being rushed, or maybe it's just not from knowing what you're comfortable with, but really being honest with that, like, no, I'm not super laid back. Like, because everybody hears, the theme I'm hearing is like, oh, I'm really laid back, and everybody here is not really laid back. And so,
What are you trying to say?
I'm one of those people, like, I am laid back, but there are certain things, like, I'm laid back, but I do also have certain expectations, and I like to know what I'm doing. I like to have a good sense of what I'm going to do, how it's going to flow, and so to be able to say that too, like, I'm laid back or I'm not laid back. I really like to know my piece, or, really be clear about goals or whatever it is, but to feel comfortable saying that as well.
And there's some things that too, structurally for us, that we certainly want to impose on the process. And part of it is, as Stephen was articulating, a prep meeting is going to happen, a brief meeting, a daily check-in. These things are part of built-in structure. So some of the things that are helpful is that, I'll just give you an example. We've had several people come work with us before, and you go to prep and like, I just kind of like to get in there and kick it a little bit. Thinking, okay, well, getting in there and kicking it is not going to cover it. It's 2 hours. So we need to talk a little bit about how we're going to kick it exactly, right? So it's just a matter of, sometimes it's just some people want it to be so loose that it's like, oh, no, that's not the way this works. You can't do this. I'm sorry. So we're just thinking about following the bigger structure. And like Dwayne was saying, there's room within the structure. If you know what the goals are in the structure, to me it makes it easier to be creative, because this is where we need to go. Here's some of the activities we're going to do. How we get there in between is, we can figure that out. Darryl, last point.
That was the last.
Oh, was it? Okay. So you've had those people too. Huh? And we're going to keep the last question. Can we do that tomorrow, for the sake of time?
Sure.
Unless you're dying right now.
I am, but we'll do it tomorrow.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's an important question.
Yes, absolutely. So you tell me. It'll take us 10 minutes. We okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So next, what we're going to do is give you, as Justin was saying, give you a little background on each of the programs. Just give you a snapshot, nothing too in depth, of the 3 programs the curriculum we're going to see in the afternoon. So Keith is going to start us off by talking a little bit about TLI. Then Shannon's going to talk a little about MVP. I'll do branded. And then basically we'll give facilitation assignments again and have at it with the curriculum for the rest of the day. All right?
All right.
Keith Lee.
TLI stuff?
Yes, sir.
All right. Many of you, most of you are familiar with the Teamwork Leadership Institute. The history of this Teamwork Leadership Institute started in 1992. It was actually started by Dr. Richard Lapchick. The co-founder was actually Len Dawson, who used to work at the center. Both of them realized here's another avenue by which to use the power of sport to positively affect lives through diversity education. It's taken on a couple of different shapes and formats, but basically it's that, using people from the athletic community to teach diversity education. It's gone from focusing on managing diversity to where it is now, diversity education and awareness. Okay, but its history, TLI has provided services for both inside and outside of school. Throughout its history, we've done workshops, for example, for Sacramento Kings. to the U.S. Navy. Provided workshops for, let's see who else there. Oh, the whole NBA offices of the NBA. Recently, we took the TLI curriculum to Paris, France, to share with some sports leaders over there of how they can use diversity education through sport. So it's got a long history in terms of where it's been, what it's done, and it's doing very well. It has done very well. And I think the horizon is very, very promising for diversity education and TLI. Many of you know a lot of our requests now are coming in the format of asking us to what we call the hybrid model. But basically, it's a combination of diversity education and gender violence prevention, specifically sexual harassment. So a lot of that, we're getting a lot of requests for that. But right now, where we're finding that TLI is being requested is through the NC2A. I think we talked a little bit about that. We have a contract with the NC2A that states that we'll do 25 to 35 workshops per year in either a 2-hour or 4-hour format for student athletes and or athletic administrators. The NC2A has bought our curriculum, of which you're going to see a little bit of today. We sold it to them, and we also have been contracted to execute it. So we've done pretty good with that so far. I think this will be our third year, Jess, or fourth? I can't remember. Starting our fourth year, assuming they renew. And I probably should be hearing from them as soon as I get back to the office. But so it's working very, very well. It's grown to the point now in terms of our focus, again, being student athletes, athletic administrators, most of the people in the athletic community. But like I said, we're starting to make our way outside that community a little bit, because even non-athletic entities at least value or respect sport. And we use people from the athletic community to use this, to apply this diversity education. Our offerings, workshop offerings, again, come in different formats. A lot of it's negotiable, except for the NC2A contract. Like I said, it's either 2 hours for student athletes, 4 hours for administrators. Sometimes we have to negotiate it with other places like NBA teams or Major League Baseball teams because of their size of the group and the time that they have. So what's been another key to our success as far as that program is concerned is our ability to be flexible, and we can adapt. TLI has in its operations, most of the time, is we do have a pre-assessment survey that we use before we go in. Kind of gives us a snapshot of where we are and what we need to emphasize. Also gives us some data in terms of the participants and how they're going to be made up, men, women, and also ethnic background. Okay. So I think the overall philosophy for all the programs, and this especially true for TLI, but not exclusively true, is that through all these processes, you need to understand that we're about challenging thinking. Because our thinking processes, for the most part, especially the older we get, starts to become, jaded a little bit and crystallized. And so we're going to challenge that thinking process. So we use these exercises, again, to manage the discussion, but also to challenge thinking. Not to say that we are right and they are wrong, or vice versa. But we acknowledge and respect the fact that there needs to be a discussion. Okay, so we just use these exercises to do this. That's all it's about. So that's kind of been the overall view of TLI. Here are the goals. As you can see, and I think that they're in your book. Very important to, even though we challenge thinking, we still have been able to maintain a comfort level to have people have open discussions at a level where they don't feel threatened. They may feel uncomfortable because they're uncomfortable addressing issues that they never addressed publicly. But if we create a safe environment, usually works out pretty good. I think when we first started this program, one of our trainers said, he said it was a situation by which he felt so comfortable, he felt comfortable enough to ask a stupid question. And that's really, when you think about it, that's great, right? So here are our goals. When we get into a deeper program down here, when we do a 6 or 8 hour, for example, if we do something like NASCAR or something like that, where it's 6 to 8 hours long per day, maybe multiple days, we definitely get into helping them develop a personal and institutional action plan. But this is the general goals of TLI. And like I said, we have, now we're at the point after 20-some, over 20-some odd years, we've done hundreds of colleges and universities, from anything from junior college D3s all the way up to the Ohio States of the world. And then we're starting to make even greater inroads in professional sport. We've been approached here recently, just approached, by all 3 major sports industries, along with Major League Soccer. So the potential is real great for diversity education. I think everybody's looking at this is where we need to grow. Okay? And of course, the military. We've done some work with the U.S. Navy, and the potential for doing more work in that particular industry, I think, is bright. All right. So TLI, that's the diversity education component, and again, diversity education. We're not. I resist the whole thing about managing diversity at this point. That's phase 2. TLI is basically phase 1. Increase the level of awareness and heighten the level of education about diversity. And diversity, by the way, because I know Mike Haynes, he had to leave, but we were talking about that. One of the things that he said he was impressed with, many things, but was that we recognize that diversity is not just black and white. Diversity has a huge rainbow of issues, and we do recognize that. We try to get that part in. Any questions about TLI? Diversity education, yes.
With the 2-hour workshop that you were doing, did you do multiple 2-hour workshops, or is it team specific, or?
Under the NC2A contract, and that one is, it's kind of a different entity because we're obligated through the contract. We can do multiple sessions, and we have. Our contract states that we'll do no more than 8 hours in a day. So that means we can do 2 4 hours, or 2 2 hours and a 4 hour. And we can do multiple days. There's been many times where we've, Nancy, where we've had situations where we've been a 3-day tour, and we've done 2 4 hours a day. That one kind of wears you out. But we've done that enough times to where that's what we look like.
Do you break it up by teams, or not?
That's up to the school. We have a kind of a criteria where we say we're going to take 2 trainers, 2 facilitators, and we don't have any more than 60 people per session. So that might mean they may have to stretch it out. Some schools have wanted us to do, all the student athletes. That's going to take, that's going to take 3 days or so. Under that contract, and we can talk about this as we go along. Under that contract, all your expenses are paid through the NC2A. That's why I was telling Carrie, that's a whole different system in terms of receipts and reimbursements and all that. All your travel is taken care of and that type of deal. But we do have some parameters unique to that contract. Other situations where that might happen is if one of our member schools in the consortium requests us outside the NC2A, can you come in and do our coaches and do our student athletes? Based upon what their needs are, we'll adjust to it. To be quite honest with you, I can't tell you how many times people have said, well, can you do like an hour with our student athletes? No, that's not a workshop, that's a speech. Or can you do 90 minutes? No, that's a presentation. If you want us to do a workshop, the minimum is 2 hours. We go in and do it, and the very first thing they say right after is, oh, it should have been longer. I didn't tell you that, So that happens often. Is that could it be longer? Yeah, I told you. But a lot lot of times they don't think we can hold the student athlete's attention, right? And we can, because the nature of the athlete is not sitting, right? Use, interactiveness, and that's what we pride ourselves on. It's interactiveness, not just standing or not just sitting, but actually doing something with their bodies and with their minds. That's what holds their attention, and they can stay there all day. If you want. So, any other questions? Anything else? Dr. Fitz.
So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about MVP, which is, for those of you who may not know it yet, Mentors in Violence Prevention. An MVP was created in 1993 by a man named Jackson Katz. And Jackson was in a graduate school at Harvard, and he was in a class called Violence in America. And he was given the opportunity to create a curriculum to address an issue he saw when he was volunteering with his sister at a women's shelter. The issue being that there were no men there. There were no men involved really in the work, and he felt like that was kind of a gap in the education, primarily of other men. And what he saw as the biggest issue being an opportunity for men to reframe the issues of men's violence against women for younger men and boys. And one of the ways that he started thinking about that, I know it's early, we're going to talk about beer for just a second. One of the ways he started thinking about that was through an ad campaign created initially because there was a company called Meister Brown. Does anyone remember Meister Brown? Terrible. Put your hands up. So there was this company called Meister Brown. They had developed a light beer for women. Beer failed miserably. The beer was bought by Miller, who said, we think we have an audience for this, men. But when you think back to the early 70s, were men drinking light beer? No, definitely not. Were they eating salads and thinking about like this and like that? No, not really. So what they thought was, we've got this product, focus groups have shown men want to drink it, now we just have to kind of bridge the gap for them to feeling like it's something that they can do. So what did they do? They hired two of the roughest, toughest, meanest guys in the NFL, Dick Butkus and Bubba Smith, and they got them in these ads discussing what? Does it taste great, or is it less filling? Right? So they skipped right over the issue of, should we drink it, should we not, and talked about why are we drinking it? Because it tastes great, or because it's less filling? And that's obviously a very quick version of that. But the idea being that if you've got these two men coming from the bastion of masculinity, the NFL, not many men are going to argue with whatever position they choose to take. And just having those two men representing it changed the way that other men saw drinking light beer. Right? And so using that example as a framework, the idea being that men who are well respected, who are considered leaders, who are looked up to by other men, you can start a conversation around some issues that we think are really important. So with that being said, they used initially college male athletes to mentor younger men and boys around issues of men's violence against women specifically, and were very successful kind of in that endeavor. So shortly thereafter, in 1995, they created a female component to the program that used female athletes to mentor young girls and younger women about the issues as well. And for us, you can see we're talking primarily about men's violence against women. We think it's really important to discuss that particularly because we know that the overwhelming nature of gender violence, relationship violence, etc. is male to female. And we know that violence exists in other ways, and we certainly put that out there and acknowledge we know violence can be female to male or same-sex partnerships. We understand all of that. But for us, we think it's important to discuss the pervasive nature of the problem, which unfortunately is men's violence against women. So when you think about all of that in terms of the training menu and the things that we can offer, we do 90-minute training sessions on the college level primarily. We also do train-the-trainer programs where we take people through 3 days of training for then preparing them to be trainers. And then we also have a number of things in between. 4-day workshops, We did last year, I remember we did a 10-hour workshop, any number of different things. The MVP curriculum is about 22 hours, so we can create any number of different iterations of the program depending upon what an organization, a client, may or may not be looking for. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so in terms of the bystander intervention, we know we talked a little bit about the bystander piece yesterday, and then we talked a little bit, we will talk more about it going forward, but one of the things we think is really important when we deal with MVP in particular and some of the issues around MVP is really trying to prepare people to do something when they're seeing things happening. At the end of the day, we want people, this is a leadership program, we want people to feel like as leaders they should do something and then equip them with the tools to actually make that thing happen. So for us, when we talk about intervention strategies, we're talking about 4 things in particular. So first of those being direct intervention. What's an example of a direct intervention? What do you mean, stop? Oh, okay, sorry. I thought I can't stop.
You know, directly going to that person and intervene, or saying, yelling, or getting in between them.
Okay, okay. So just going directly to the situation and putting yourself in it somehow to stop it. Okay. What's an example of an indirect intervention? Nancy?
Calling campus police, for example.
Okay. Calling campus police. Thank you. What else? What's an example of distraction?
Asking a question or something that you see something going on or something happening, you can just ask one of the people a question, direction, or whatever it may be, and distract what's going on between both of them.
Okay. And finally, what do you think we mean by protocol? How could you use protocol as an intervention strategy?
Invoking some type of rule or structure in the system. So Nancy's example of calling the police could be a combination of it's a direct intervention, but it's using some type of protocol. The law is being broken. The protocol is call the police. Or if it's in a team structure or some sort of organizational structure, going to the chain of command and talking to somebody there.
Okay. All right. Does that make sense to everyone in terms of talking about options? When we're talking about options, we also want to give people options about what they can do to intervene, because we certainly understand that not the same thing isn't going to work for everyone, or the same thing won't be comfortable for everyone. So we don't want people to opt out for lack of the opportunity to do something that feels right to them. Does that make sense? Okay, so when we're talking about MVP, we have several goals that we want to achieve with each training session. So for us, first is raising awareness. We really just want people to be aware of the level of the problem, the nature of the issues we're talking about. And we don't want that to be a lesson that they have to learn personally. But even more so, we know there are a lot of sensationalized stories out there that people hear about men's violence against women, and we want to be clear that for every one of those stories you're hearing, it's happening exponentially more than that. It's happening to people you probably know, people in your life, people in your neighborhood. So we try to be really clear with people about the level of the problem that we're talking about. And in addition to that, much like Keith said, challenging thinking in terms of the TLI and diversity issues, we try to do much the same thing. We know, it's no stretch to say that we have some societal issues that are really important to discuss, and unfortunately for us, the more we hear things, the more normalized it becomes, the more difficult it is to get people to do something different. So we really try to push people around why we hold some of the beliefs that we hold so deeply, how can we maybe challenge that, step outside the box a little bit in order to move forward, and we think that that's an important conversation for people to have, and we know at times that creates a little tension in the room for people, but we think it's healthy tension, we think it's important. So we certainly try to challenge people's thinking around some of our issues. In addition to that, we try to open dialogue. I think you've heard and seen that for us, we really think interaction is the key to learning. We really think that that's the way to engage people in a real conversation about these issues. So for us, we think it's really important to get a dialogue going. And finally, for us, inspiring leadership. MVP at its foundation is a leadership program. And we think that that's the way that we can really be best about confronting these kind of issues. So we feel like if we can get the right people in the room, then we have an opportunity to move this conversation forward, but also to really empower them as leaders to do something when they see these types of things happening. And leadership, especially for student athletes, and usually with a lot of the groups that we're working with, is something they're hearing about. And so we're just trying to kind of flip the switch for them in terms of these issues. Does that make sense to everyone? And then finally, in terms of accomplishments, for MVP, we have done work with about probably 150 high schools over the last 17 years at this point. And we've been on approximately 200 college campuses through the SEC, through contracts with the Big Ten, the Atlantic 10. We've worked with any number of other institutions over the years, and many of those are repeat visits, which we think is so important to continue the conversation multiple times. In the professional sport realm, I believe now we've officially worked in every major sport, being the NBA with the Orlando Magic. We've done several teams in Major League Baseball. We've done work on the NFL Life Skills menu. We did a WNBA training this summer. We had that opportunity. And then also with NASCAR through the, I think, Keith, the hybrid program that Keith was talking about. We've had the opportunity to do some of that work as well. And then with the United States military, I think we've worked with every branch of the military. The Army, we were in Iraq this fall, Jeff mentioned that. The Navy as well. The Marine Corps they've been working with since 1997. MVP is in fact the only system-wide gender violence prevention program in the history of the Marine Corps. We've also done work with the Air Force and, who am I missing? I feel like I missed one. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. There we go.
Check this out.
What a great place, it's a great...
So, and in addition to these, we also do a lot of work with social service providers, other educators, and we really have seen MVP just continue to grow exponentially over the years, and we just think that it's so important to have you all as a part of the team and to have you understanding what the program is about, and hopefully you'll see much more of that as we go forward. I didn't want to talk your ear off about it too much, but you will see as the day goes on some of the exercises, so we're really excited to get you into that process and get you learning the curriculum.
Just going back to the CLI, I'm sorry, that it doesn't seem to have the history and philosophy in the book. So is that, can we pull that off the website? Or?
The TLI history and philosophy is on the website?
Yes, yes.
Any other questions?
It should be.
It's enough, okay. Thanks.
We have extras of those too. Anybody can get one.
Any other questions about MVP specifically?
Oh, yes.
Okay, turn it over to Jeff. Talk more about it. Or anything certainly you want to add about MVP.
No, there's always something to add about everything. You know?
Write that down.
Drinking over there. Luckily this morning. What's going on over there? Meister Brown. Is a Meister Brown light over there? So Keith and Shannon, if you look at our three programs, gave you the parents, and then the brand of the leader is kind of the baby amongst the group, because you've got those two programs that have been on hundreds of college campuses, worked with every major pro sport, worked with all the branches of the military, presented at almost probably 100 conferences. They've been around, been there, done that. Well, what we'd like to think we've done is taken the best of those programs and what we know as educators over all these years and applied it to Brand the Leader. Brand the Leader, our endeavor with this was created in 2008. And just to give you a snapshot of how this happened for us, we were working with two people, or two places, really closely. Michigan State had been working with us on coming in and developing programming, or, well, I should say, primarily delivering MVP. Right? So they had us come to MVP every summer as part of their new student-athlete orientation. And they were amazed, as you'll find, many of our clients are, how much their student-athletes engage and want to talk once we get in the room. And it always makes us wonder, what other things are they doing? You know, it must not be asking questions or generating discussion, but they were like, wow, this is great. Love the way you have former athletes that really engage with our young people. Wow, and they basically what they were asking us is there more that you can do? And Jim Pignataro was at Michigan State, said, look, I've got to cover off every year on alcohol, on hazing, on, you know, he reeled off a list of 6 or 7 things that they needed to talk about, including the MVP-related issues. And he said, is there a way that I could work with you all and you could develop something to help us deliver to our student athletes? So we talked about it for a year and a half or so and said, yeah, you know what, I think we can. Let's get specific and we'll try to work something out. At the same time, we were finishing our first contract with the SEC. And the first contract with the SEC was 3 years for MVP. And as they were finishing up, they were saying similar things. Wow, our campuses love the fact that you all come in and really engage with student athletes. However, we have more issues that we need to address with our student athletes than just violence against women. So here's the deal. We want to continue working with y'all, but we need to cover off on these issues. If you can do something about this, then we can continue working together. If you can't, then, you know, it's been great working with you. So we had, you know, 2 people at the same time saying, hey, we love the way you all provide and deliver education. We need more. Like, we need to expand the topics. Can you do that? So we're thinking with both of these people, okay, yes, we can. And so we start creating these, you know, educational modules, if you will, on this range of different topics. But we're looking for a connective thread. And for us, the connective thread was leadership. Okay, it's all about leadership. All these things are going to be about leadership. But it wasn't the hook that we were looking for. So at the same time, Justin was working with something. John was a part of this too, working with something at the University of South Florida, which Justin was calling Branded a Bull. And it was using a PowerPoint presentation and capturing this concept of mainstream branding, you know, business branding, if you will. And getting student athletes to think about themselves as a brand by showing examples of popular athletes, professional or college, and how they brand themselves, if you will, and how the decisions that they make will impact their brand value up or down. So if somebody gets caught with a DUI, and it's not rocket science to figure out what's that going to do to their brand value. You know, somebody is academic All-American and, you know, wins the Player of the Year award or Man of the Year award for off-the-field activities. You know, it doesn't take somebody a lot to figure out what that is going to do to their brand value. So that ended up being the connective hook for us, using this branded piece and how their decisions will impact their brand and getting them to think personally about their decisions and how those decisions have ramifications building away from them. All right? So that's kind of the general gist of that. And stop me if you want to learn any more. So just to give you an idea of what are some of the topics that we've been asked to cover, or a few of the ones that have been most popular. So we call these brand changers. So the whole idea is, you know, if you get engaged in one of these things on either the right or the wrong side, this can be a brand changer for you. So if you get caught cheating in class, right, that's a brand changer in the wrong direction, right? If you're academic All-American, there's a brand changer in the positive direction. Like, so just getting people to understand the distinction. And we'll have the opportunity, I think it's tomorrow, that somebody's going to actually lead us through a full brand changer. And so if you just to give you an idea how that works, a brand changer or a unit, if you think education, an education unit would be an agree, disagree, unsure statement to kick it off, followed up by some examples of some things that have happened in the culture and sport culture around whatever the topic is, and then finishing off with a scenario to discuss how, as bystanders, they can help teammates if they're in that situation. All right, so if you think about it in a nutshell, we try to do that in 25 minutes or half an hour. So you talk about drive-by education. There's some drive-by education for you. But, you know, here's some of the topics that we found are most popular. And this one has been a lot of fun to try and figure out how to get people to think differently about it. So basically, we focus on marijuana use with this one, trying to get young people to think about, you know, what's the difference between smoking marijuana or drinking, because many of you probably already know this. Many kids don't see a difference, and many people actually think it's hypocritical that people can drink on campus, but they can't smoke, and it just becomes a very interesting discussion to try and get them to understand the ramifications.
Well, it makes you play better.
Yeah, more relax, you know, I'm able to go out there and do what I need to do. So here's some of the brand changes. Right? There's more than this, but I just want to give you a snapshot. The goals for this, with everything we do, hopefully you'll see while there are some nuanced differences between these three, there's more similarities than differences, because it's all philosophically the same, right? So you're wanting to challenge, there's thinking around some of these issues, really looking at empowerment. All these things are very consistent. How do we challenge the thinking by raising some awareness? How do we empower people through our leadership paradigm? And how do we try to get them to think about being accountable for each other? Another key theme we keep seeing is, like, well, if I'm in a class and a bunch of my teammates are cheating on this test, maybe I'm not going to cheat, but I'm not going to say anything to them about cheating either, because that's their business. So we're trying to get people to understand that if your teammates do something or something happens to your teammates, that's part of you, right? That's an extension. You're responsible for their behavior as well. You can't make a decision for them, but you also can't absolve yourself of any decision they make. Right? So when you think about, with Kyler and Brandy both from Florida State, every time people hear about Florida State and think about academic fraud, think about how many questions you all have to answer, right? There's no question that even people who had nothing to do with that personally, their brand is attached to it. So the decisions of a few can affect everybody else, right? So then obviously just trying to create some awareness and create understanding on some of these issues is just at the core of what we're trying to accomplish. Given that BAL is the baby of the family, the accomplishments are a little smaller, but we are getting around now. This year coming up will be the third year of our contract with the SEC, where we go to every one of those institutions for at least one visit. Four Shannon last year had us come back for a second visit, to work with student athletes on the issues we just talked about. Michigan State keeps on growing and expanding. The folks, I think it was the outside room, no, it was here, had the topic, Justin, you all had that, right? With the Michigan State fight.
Yeah.
Some people are familiar with the football, the incident that happened with Michigan State a year ago. It was a fight where several guys ended up being arrested. 9 people were dismissed from the team. It really created a firestorm there. And as a result of some of the work we were doing with them, what they've tried to do is put together a more comprehensive package where we're now going to be working with the football team 3 times a year. We just were out there with the first years, their incoming group, when they first got on campus right after the 4th of July weekend, and spent 4 hours, 2 hours, no, 2.5 hours, 5 hours, 2.5 hours on one day and 2.5 hours on the next day, going through MVP and branded issues with them, just trying to really provide a deeper understanding of what the expectations are. And we're hoping more people will not have to have an incident to think about. Well, this would be much better if we could do this. But the head coach is understanding his brand is attached to the behavior of his players. So it's, okay, if my brand is getting dragged through the mud, I want to make sure I'm doing as much as I can to make sure these guys understand what my expectations are. So that's been exciting. The positive side of that is the opportunity to provide repeated opportunities to educate the same group of people is pretty cool. And then Major League Baseball, they've started doing something, it's almost like a rookie transition deal once guys get into their camp. And they take, what each of these teams do is they identify their top 20 or 25 prospects. They could be single A all the way to triple A guys, and they bring them together for some type of, quote unquote life skills or off the field development. And 2 teams had us come in this past spring to work with their that group, that top prospect group, the Phillies and the Mets. Both had us come and do that. So that's branded in a nutshell. And we expect with all this stuff, it's just going to keep growing. I think Shannon was saying yesterday, we're projecting somewhere around 100 training trips for this year. So if there's another thing, if you're looking around wondering how much work you're going to be able to do, well, how much do you want to do? That's what it comes, sometimes that comes down to. So does anybody have any questions about the didactic delivery of these 3 backgrounds of these programs? I know it's hard to even grasp those pieces, but we always feel we want to do them right in a row like that, so you can see how similar they were. Hopefully you were seeing that this all is very similar, all this stuff. So if you've had experience with one and now you're going to another, it's not a big bad monster. It's going to be very familiar for you as far as the philosophy and the approach. It's just a matter of getting some experience. I think Stephen said yesterday, some reps. Right? Christy, right?
Does the school have to be a member of the consortium to get branded?
They don't. The consortium members get a discount, but the school doesn't have to be a member. I don't think all the, for instance, I don't think all the SEC schools are members. Is that right, Jessica?
I'm not sure.
A couple of them may be members and not know it. A couple of them are not members, and a couple are, that type of deal. But yeah, basically they get a break. So if they're a member, they get a discount. All right. Anybody else have any questions about any of this? Is this consistent to you, or do you see more differences than similarities? Okay, cool. Okay, so what we're going to do, give you a stretch break. People use a break at this point? Yeah, okay, so let's see, it's about 10 after. So if we come back, we do 10 minutes, 20 after. All right, 20 after, we'll get back here and get going.